Adele Luta is a scientist and innovator. She's worked at NASA's Johnson Space Flight Center as a certified mission control center flight controller and astronaut instructor, where she supported over 90 spacewalks. And she's been part of a team developing a lunar lander under NASA's Artemis program. She's a private pilot, a scuba diver. In her spare time, she likes to work on coral recovery projects. She was also recently selected as an If-Then ambassador for the American Association for the Advancement of Science, so to inspire youth to pursue STEM fields. I'm going to bring Adele in live with us right now. Hey, Adele, how are we doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me again. It's nice to be part of the festival this year.
Of course, Adele, it's always great to see you. Every time we chat, there's a new project, there's something else that you're working on. And actually, we talked to Sydney a little bit earlier, who's an If-Then ambassador as well. We connected yesterday, and I hear your statues from the If-Then ambassadors are moving to the Smithsonian.
They are. We're all going up to, well, as many as us can, we're going up to Washington, D.C. to celebrate the launch of the exhibit. And then you can visit them anytime in March.
All right. Awesome. Well, Adele, I'm going backstage again. I want you to take over for a little bit. Let's dive into your story, and then we'll wrap with a few questions.
All right. Sounds good. Let me share my screen. And we'll go full screen. How's that look?
It didn't come up for us.
Oh, hang on.
There we go. I see it coming now. Perfect.
All right, we're full screen?
Looks good.
Great. Okay, so thank you so much. As I mentioned, it's such an honor to be back here and to be able to end the festival as well. We've had so many amazing women over the last 3 days. I was able to jump into some of the talks. And what I'm going to talk about today is human exploration, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently and hopefully kind of engage you as the audience at home in kind of feeling and thinking about what it's going to mean to go to these extreme environments. So a little bit of a shout out. On Friday was the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. You might have seen on social media people playing STEM tag and back and forth and promoting some of the women who had inspired them. I wanted to share 3 books that have come out just recently that I've read all 3, and I think they're really inspiring and fun to read for human spaceflight, because each one of them pulls apart something that's a little bit different about human spaceflight if you're interested in that. But they also were not the stories that were told as much when I was younger. I mean, we had some great biographies and autobiographies, especially of Apollo, but it's been wonderful to see these stories coming out. So Handprints on Hubble, and this is just a shout out, there's no sponsorship, it's just books that I think are really great that recently came out from, your local library, or buy a book or get it digital. So Catherine Sullivan talks about the design of Hubble and the spacewalks involved to repairing Hubble and the tools and what took for the innovation and design. And then also Nicole, which I know talked earlier during the festival, I think, she talks about her experiences with human spaceflight, but also focuses on conservation and art. And that's really kind of a unique combination there. And then Colonel Eileen Collins just came out with a book telling some of her select stories. And in this particular case, she really emphasizes kind of her leadership aspect. She was the first female shuttle commander, and also kind of getting out of your comfort zone. And I'm really excited to mention on this talk that Eileen was able to work together, giving a copy away free to anyone. I'm going to actually do a raffle. So if you follow this talk, there's going to be something that I'm going to say in the talk that is something that Eileen and I both talk about. She talks about it in her book. I talk about it when I do my presentations. So something we have really emphasized in common. And if you go ahead and message me on social media, or you can email me through my website, and you mention that phrase, you're going to be part of a raffle to go ahead and receive a signed copy of her book. So I'm going to put all the names in a raffle, pick one. And of course, if you're younger, you're inspired by STEM, feel free to tell me your age and who you are, and I'll give you a shout out, even if it's through your parents, for their handle or their address. So I'm just excited to share that with one of you, and of course, share the message for today. So what I want to talk about is sustainable living on the moon. And in particular, this is a picture, just a graphic of what NASA has pushed out as far as Artemis and what this base camp is going to look like. And there's going to be some additional challenges to sustainably living on the moon versus just going and visiting for a couple of days. And here you see the vision's a little different because we have a lunar lander, a lunar habitat, but we also have, an unpressurized rover, which we had a similar design during Apollo, but we're going to have a pressurized rover where the crew members can go inside and take their spacesuits and put them back on. We'll also have multiple people going outside and doing EVAs, which is very exciting for me because right now we normally do 2, and it was really neat to be able to see more teams of people outside. But sustainably living is going to be meaning that we're going to be there for longer duration. And I'm going to talk about what it means to live in those extreme environments. You're also going to see that when we go back to the South Pole, it's very dark there. And so there's going to be a lot of additional lighting, communication, and power is going to be an additional challenge as well. So all these things are going to come to play. And why, in particular, the moon? Well, it's leading us back to Mars. So for you that are watching that's younger, that's inspired by STEM, what we've learned on the International Space Station, we're applying to the moon. And from the moon, we're applying that to Mars. And you can see here that Earth is a lot further away than it is in that perspective of being from the moon. And so we need to get it right. We really need to understand some of these challenges to be able to explore further. And so here's the part where I want to introduce something a little different to you guys. I want you to take a second and you're sitting or you're standing wherever you are, and I want you to kind of just observe everything around you. Take a second and feel your breath coming in and out. Something you probably don't even think about. Maybe you have a glass of something to drink next to you. Maybe you've gotten one earlier, you had lunch or breakfast. Think about things that are touching your skin, your feet on the floor, sitting in your seat or standing against a wall, what those sensations are like in gravity. Think about the temperatures you're feeling around you. Is it cold? Is it warm? Do you have a sweatshirt on? Is it sunny? And maybe you have the AC on or the heating on wherever you are. So all of these things are kind of surrounding us in our daily life. And we don't really think about them as much. We think about, if we think about counting things or things that are limited, we might think about, I have 1 or 2 more TV shows on my favorite show that's coming out, and then I have to wait for the next season. Or you think about, I have 1 more of this particular food that I really like in the kitchen, then I got to go back to the grocery store. But we don't necessarily think about these things that are surrounding us. In some cases, you maybe even take them for granted. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those things. So let's just talk about atmosphere for right now. Let's talk about the breath of you breathing in and out and being able to, hang on, let me see if my video play. Just the wind around us and the air we breathe and breathing in oxygen and breathing out that CO2 and not having toxins necessarily around us. Sometimes we have pollution, but the air provides that circulation. Thinking about water and a lot of us, not everyone in the world, but a lot of us are able to go to our kitchen sink and we can get water straight out of the faucet and we can drink that water. And maybe you didn't finish the whole glass and you actually poured it out before you put the glass in the dishwasher or something like that. And so the water surrounding us is such an abundant resource on Earth that we're very lucky we have this. Another thing is just our surface, just everything around us, the dirt. Maybe you go outside and you think, I have to take my shoes off before I come in the house, or I have to wash my hands if I've been doing something out in the garden, or I fell and I maybe got some dirt on my hands. But it's really like a secondary thought, and it's not something that we worry too much about because it's kind of always just there. And in some ways, it's a little bit harmless because we can just go wash our hands under the sink. Well, that's not the case when we go to these extreme environments. When we go to an extreme environment, and I pulled this definition off of Wikipedia if you'd like to go and kind of read more of that entry, but just for sake of generalization, being in an extreme environment means that it's going to be very difficult to survive. It's these extreme conditions such as temperature and energy. A lot of times you may not even have pressure. You could be in the vacuum of space. And so because of that, you really have to accommodate or sometimes pack or take the things we need in order to survive. And that's where exploring comes. So exploring by the seat of your pants, there are extreme environments on Earth. Those are our poles, some deserts, volcanoes, deep ocean trenches. And then, of course, in our solar system, except for Earth, every planet is considered an extreme environment. So we really have to think and count, as scientists and engineers, every single resource we bring. So when we are thinking about estimates or numbers about every breath, cleaning that atmosphere, temperature control, power, that water's very heavy. And so that's why you'll hear a lot of times going to extreme environments, we're looking for the water in places that it's already there that we can hopefully tap into, because water is very, very expensive to launch and go up into space. It goes down to the clothes we wear and the environments that we have for the humans. So when we go back to the moon, and I just wanted to play this fun video. I think sometimes when we look at pictures of extreme environments, we think, oh, okay, that's just a picture. This is a video I took at Space Center Houston. I think the video with the 3 dimensions, I'll just play it real quick again. I think it brings it to life a little bit more, but imagine if that was an atmosphere and that was actually the vacuum of space. So, it really is something where we have to think about and count and be very precise in what we're doing when we send someone out to these extreme environments. So I'll talk a little bit about myself, and then I'll come back to what that's going to take specifically for spacesuits and integration of being able to do those spacewalks. So for me, my background is in physics. I really loved math when I was growing up as a kid. And when I discovered physics, it was a way for me to apply math to something and take it to that next level. And so generally, there's 2 types of physicists. There's theoretical and experimental. I fall within the experimental line. But as a kid, I was really inspired by the astrophysics and understanding the universe and Big Bang and what does this mean. And so I actually started going to school thinking I was going to be a PhD researcher as an astrophysicist, and ended up really being more aligned with applied physics and being able to work with these multidisciplinary teams to overcome challenges for these extreme environments. And as Joe knows, and he mentioned, I loved doing that as well and exploring, but really solving these problems as teams is something that I really find rewarding and I really enjoy. And so here's a picture of me as a little girl. I would go sailing with my family. That was my first sense of exploring, and maybe I would be interested in that. We would go on Lake Michigan, and it was my sense of being on a team, which was my family. That's our first team. And then also safety, and always being aware of safety, and then, exploring and kind of it being out there, kind of away from a house, which was exciting. And in my 20s, as Joe mentioned, I had the honor of being an EVA instructor and flight controller at Johnson Space Flight Center, where I specialized in training astronauts on how to do the spacewalk. So getting in a suit, depressing, going outside, starting to learn those tasks that they would need to do outside, and then worked all the way through the retirement of shuttle and a couple increments for the space station. So the next field goal that's going to take us to the moon and Mars is Orion. And that is going to have to provide all of these conditions that I talked about for extreme environments. So we have to calculate that for Orion for the duration, whether it's a few days or it's 6 months to go to Mars. Additionally, what does that mean for spacesuits? Well, a lot of people don't realize that the spacesuit is a vehicle for one. So for that time that we're going to be in that vehicle, whether it's 6 or 8 or 10 hours, depending on all the different procedures and activities we have to do to get in and out of the spacesuit safely, to do the spacewalk, we have to take all of those consumables. So during Apollo, we had a great spacesuit. It was amazing that the engineers were able to pull it together as well as they did, giving all the unknown things that we had. And now for the space station, we have a spacesuit you might have seen many more pictures of, which is for the Space Shuttle and the International Space Station. But we're actually getting ready as a community in human spaceflight to make another spacesuit. And that spacesuit will first replace the one on ISS and then eventually be converted for our next spacesuit for the moon. And we're going to need more mobility. Again, we're going to need to do more EVAs out of that, extravehicular activities out of that spacesuit. And so the challenges are going to be a little bit different than they were for Apollo. And so there's a lot of learning and a lot of calculating we have to do to make sure that we set up those individuals, those explorers, in the best situation possible to survive these extreme environments. And of course, what we want to get to is something that's like the Martian, a suit that's very easy to put on and off, looks more like clothing than it does necessarily like a bulkier spacesuit, but we're not quite there yet. However, if this sounds exciting to you out there, there's a lot of work still to be done for spacesuits, and I would encourage you to learn more about it and, help us move that forward. Additionally, one of the things I talked about was taking all these consumables, the water, the air, the pressure that we're going to need. So part of that atmosphere inside the spacesuit, the thermal control. But lunar regolith is additionally challenging in the fact that it's very, very sharp. And so it cuts things. And so here's an example of a video. This is my aviation glasses. You can see that I have scratches on them. I mean, just from normal wear and tear, throwing them in a bag every once in a while. I try not to get scratches, but it happens. And they're actually pretty scratch resistant. But the regolith on the moon is highly, highly sharp. And so it not only will scratch the visors, but it'll scratch different aspects of the suit. It scratches your skin, and it's very sharp. And so you can't necessarily just brush it off or wash it off in the same way that you can just regular dirt or soil on Earth. So we're having to really take problems that we didn't think about as much before because we didn't have this challenge on Earth, and really have to break it down and think about how are we going to do this sustainably. Also, I want to mention that sometimes in life, you don't have to pick just one thing. So for me, physics is my love, and I love working in human spaceflight. But I additionally am a scuba diver, and I'm also a pilot, and I love flying seaplanes, and I do work with coral restoration in Florida. And those are hobbies, but science, as being a scientist, also pays me well enough that I can actually do those activities. So sometimes as a kid, you think, well, I have to pick one thing, and you actually don't necessarily always have to pick one thing. You can do a lot of really interesting hobbies or activities or crossover jobs in your life. And I was able to do these as well. And part of my scuba diving actually also applied when I worked at NASA as an astronaut instructor, because I was able to dive in the neutral buoyancy laboratory. And the reason I bring this up, because there's a transition of working in the pool, not just on the shuttle and the station, but now for the surface of the moon. And we're able to do measurements in metabolic rates when we're in the pool. And that allows us to get closer to understanding those consumables and how much of it we have to bring or account for when we go out to do these spacewalks. So here's a couple of pictures I wanted to share with you. This is one picture where the astronauts now are starting to be actually on the surface of the moon, which is the pool, instead of floating around as they are when they're working neutrally buoyant for the space station. And then this is the rock yard, which is at Johnson Space Flight Center in Houston, Texas, where you can see they're working at night to simulate those nighttime, well, not nighttime, but I should say South Pole conditions that the astronauts are going to have when they go back to the moon. And so neither of these environments are going to replicate entirely what we're going to have, but we combine the data that we have and try to also combine models that we have to take that data to get as close as possible before we can get actual data on the new suit for the moon. So as a scientist, a lot of what we're trying to do is do our best estimates. You've probably heard about, hypothesis and trying to calculate things. Engineers also make assumptions. And then we pull that data together and then try to see how we can come together to actually get as close as possible to real life. And then, of course, once we have actual data, it makes it a lot easier for us to actually forward work a lot of those and optimize things. But there's a lot of unknowns right now. And so it's very challenging for us to try to figure that out. Even though we have a lot of experience on ISS, it's going to be interesting to see what the first lunar EVAs, surface EVAs actually look like. And so it takes a large team. When I talk about these multidisciplinary teams, it's real data, but it's also doctors, engineers, scientists, computer programmers, and we're producing a model that's a human-machine teaming model. So it's also working with the computers and the software in a way that they are part of the team as well. And so in closing, what I want to share with you is it's always important if you want to work in a STEM field to get a solid degree. A lot of these jobs now are very specific in the fact that you have to have a solid degree in science or engineering. So make sure you pay attention to that when you're looking at universities and you pick the major that will align best, because 4 years is a lot of work. Also, know your stuff. That is something that Colonel Collins and I agree with. You need to know your stuff. So it's not just about finishing school, but also making sure that you can apply it in real life. That's how you get to be on some of the cool projects, is if you really know your stuff. And change if you need to. It's okay. You know, I started in astrophysics and I pivoted to applied physics, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It's just refining what you know. It's gonna take work. Being in a STEM field does take work. It's worth it. And it's gonna take many little choices. It's not necessarily one big choice you make, but it's all the little choices you make over time. And sometimes the world only sees those big ones. It's also going to take some struggling, you know, even if you got straight A's all through school, you know, you're going to get to a point probably in college or even in real life where it's still going to, there's still going to be challenges. And that's good. That's getting out of your comfort zone. That's learning more. That's pushing boundaries. That's when you're doing the cool projects. And sometimes the world is only going to acknowledge those successes, but don't worry because, you know, with each failure, you're learning something. And I just want to end with, there is a place for you and we need you and you're going to make a difference. So just keep that in mind when you're struggling or you're working hard, that you are part of what we need. So again, just as a reminder, I just wanted to thank you so much for this opportunity. Here is my social media accounts. If you like hearing about seaplane flying and coral restoration and human spaceflight, feel free to follow me because that's what I talk about. But also, you have until midnight tonight to go ahead and send me a message about what Colonel Collins and I both agree on, and I will put you in a raffle for a free copy. So I'm gonna exit and stop sharing there.
Awesome. Adele, thank you so much. What a great presentation. So many things stuck out to me there. One being your advice not to be afraid to kind of try new things and go with the flow. And you know, career changes to different fields is natural and normal. There's no, I think one thing that we've learned this weekend is there's no right path to getting to science or exploration or adventure or conservation. Everybody's path is different, and that's a good thing. It brings so many different perspectives into so many different fields.
Absolutely. And I think also when you've tried different things, you're more likely to be adaptable even in your own field. So even if you are pretty sure what you want to do, having those experiences helps you overcome the challenges then.
Yep. And then you might not be able to answer this totally, but how far off do you think we are from that next gen spacesuit?
Yes, so pretty close, because NASA put out a release for proposals in the fall, and several companies, some of which have announced publicly, applied, and then they're looking to award sometime in 2022 the contract. And that means that those companies will have to align, especially with SpaceX, which has won the first landing for the moon. So they'll be working to make sure that they're compatible to go outside.
It's exciting. It's a really exciting time we're in right now. You know, one thing that drives me crazy is sometimes I think students hear or are told that we've made all the big discoveries. There really isn't anything left to explore and discover, and that couldn't be further from the truth. What advice would you give to a student who's interested in pursuing a career in science, and maybe even tailor a little bit more to a young girl in science who has maybe heard, you know, why do you want to do that?
Yeah, no, I think that one thing I found, which is so nice, is that it's never too early to start. So there is a ton of YouTube, there's resources, more so than even when I was a kid. So go ahead and it's never too early. You can listen to a lecture, you can read a book, and if you don't understand every word in there, that's okay. As scientists and and when we were in school, it took a couple of times sometimes for us to learn concepts. And so, you know, reach out and just read and explore and watch videos. It's really never too early to start, especially if you find that you're in middle school or high school and you're kind of bored with your curriculum. There's just so many other things you can do to kind of enrich your experience. And I think the other thing is, you know, as explorers, and Joe, you know, we hear stories all the time. If you read about these explorers, them customizing the stuff they needed to do the exploration, whether they built their own gear or they were, you know, building their own exploration ships or all these parts, building their own teams. When you're at those boundaries, when you're pushing forward, you're not going to find the one size fits all, and you're not probably going to be part of that one size fits all. So as explorers, I think we learn to make or modify or adapt or do. And again, it's never too early to do that. But I think there's no sense of exclusion, because really, in some ways, everybody's excluded until you decide you're going to include yourself and you're going to make it happen to be there and to do the thing you want to do. So I think it's always just part of telling yourself, like, this is what I want to do, this is where I am, and I belong here.
Yeah, absolutely. No question. And that's a story that you hear time and time again is, oh, this doesn't exist yet, or this isn't possible to study. Well, there's people who hear stuff like that and say, challenge accepted, and pioneer, forge away, try something, look at it from a different angle, bring somebody in who maybe you wouldn't think of collaborating with, and finding those solutions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on the festival. It's been wonderful.
Oh, Adele, it's an absolute treat to have you joining us. I do want to take a quick moment here and just share. I know you shared it already, but let's just share two things here. First, the link to the If Then ambassador page. So obviously we can find your profile and some of the amazing women who you've shared this honor with, and who are doing so much to push STEM, the STEM field, out to younger students, especially young girls. And then I do want to share again here these links. So to your Twitter, to your Instagram, if you want to follow along with Adele's adventures, you can do so right there. All right. Well, Adele, again, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining the Women Blaze Trails Festival. Thank you for being, I guess, the headliner, the closer, the final act for the festival. It was great to see you. Great to hear what you've been up to. And thanks for the great advice that you've given to those joining us today.
Of course. Thank you.